Okay, so you can see that I have my planning sketches done from yesterday in class. And I've created 4 different versions. And when I've done my the eyeball portion, I have made rough sketches just based on different versions of the eye anatomy illustrations that are in the reference photo and resource folder on the assignment from yesterday. So you can see in each case I'm using a little bit different version of the illustration of an anatomy of an eye, because there are several different ways you can present that in an illustration. So from here, what I need to do now is create a full-sized illustration of my plan, right? So right now I maybe have one of these that is making me feel a little bit better than another, right? So it's now my decision to decide which one am I going to use. There's part of me that I like this one best. So if I think about it in terms of a grid, right? I've got this grid section here, a grid section here, a grid section here, and then this big guy in the middle. So I have lots of room for text. I also like the drama of that strong diagonal, but this one also has a bit of a diagonal. So now it is up to me to decide which one of these illustrations I'm actually going to create the full-size version of and making it be as accurate as possible. So here's what I'm going to do. I need a piece of my sketchbook paper. So this is my sketchbook for this class. And what I'm gonna do is just find a sheet that is reasonably blank. Looks like this one is blank. And I can either leave it in the sketchbook or I can go ahead and I can tear it out so that I have a separate sheet of paper to work on. That sketchbook paper should give me a piece of paper that is the same size as this mixed media sheet. So here's my sketchbook paper that I've ripped out, and you can see it's the same size as our mixed media paper. We're gonna make a full-size version of our drawing on this sheet of paper today to kind of fully lay out our plan. The reason we do this on a separate sheet of paper, quite simply, is because we're going to be watercoloring, and the mixed media paper, if you erase at all, the watercolor just doesn't stick the same. So what I'm gonna do now is, looking at my plan, right? I am planning on a vertical layout for my page. So here we have vertical layout. And so what I can do out here on my sheet is I can start to kind of think about where things are gonna go. So I don't know what I'm gonna title this yet, but right now I'm just going to make this be the title page, or the title like box, as I'm making my plan. I want my eyeball illustration to be the biggest portion here in the middle, and I sort of think it should take up about the same amount of space as my hand. So my eye, my portrait eye, will fit about right here on this sheet. So what I'm gonna need to do first then is measure. What size is my portrait eye going to need to be? And so if I quickly just kind of map out, this is 4 inches. And it's going to be about 4 by 3 inches. So 1, 2, 3, roughly 4 by 3 inches right here in this top corner. So I should have a photo in Google Classroom of my eye. And what I'm gonna do is use my tracing paper. And I am going to bring up, if you need to, you can put it in a slideshow presentation just so you can adjust the size more easily. But here is my portrait eye out of the slideshow from the assignment. And I'm gonna use my tracing paper, and this is one that I've used before. You can see it's got my hands on it and whatever. And I'm going to tape it right over the top of the screen. And I'm going to trace all of the elements of my portrait eye. I am ignoring for right now the eyelashes. I could put a couple on here. But for the most part, I'm skipping the eyelashes. You'll notice that I am really lightly outlining some of the shadows that are there. I'm also making sure to measure. And it is 4 inches by 3 inches so that I know it's the right size for my illustration. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take that back out here to my paper, and I'm going to place it where I want it out here on my illustration, like final. And I'm going to go ahead and use my transfer paper to trace that out here onto my final sheet of paper. The reason I start with my portrait eye versus the other illustration is that this is fairly fast because I get to use the tracing paper. We use the tracing paper just so you don't have to like struggle to draw a self-portrait eye using a grid. And it's relatively easy for us to get the size pretty accurate. And remember that this is pressure sensitive, so I can add some of these shadow details on my illustration, like where the shadows are gonna go. Before I take this off, I'm gonna just go ahead and peek and make sure that I got everything transferred. I did. So there's step 1, is I'm gonna go ahead and put my portrait eye into my illustration. Step 2 is I need my eye illustration that I'm going to use to go into my portrait now. So I want to pull that up on the screen. And the one that I'm using has a bit of a diagonal, and I kind of liked that diagonal line effect. And I'm just gonna measure just to make sure that it looks like it's gonna fit, and it's definitely going to fit. So here's what I'm doing now is I'm going to use this grid to create my illustration. And so kind of lining this up with what will be the edge of my paper. And I'm going to go ahead and tape this on here so that it doesn't move. And now what I can see is I need a grid out of my paper. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 6 by 7. So on my sheet, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mark my grid lines. Because remember, this will end up being a bit of a rough draft for us. And then I'm going to make a drawing of that illustration out here on my paper. Very carefully. And we will continue to work on this tomorrow because this is going to take me a while to complete. But you can see that I'm going to go ahead and just grid this section of my paper. And then make my contour line drawing. I have a version of this finished using one of the other illustrations. So you can see I've used the grid to keep my eye illustration as accurate as possible. And this is what I have at this point for my eye illustration. I am currently not happy with the layout, and we'll talk about if you end up with layout problems in class tomorrow. But for right now, this is what you need to get started on. This would be what you would need to have finished by the end of class tomorrow.